These, do you have these?
Nope. I've never used one.
I've seen it.
Okay. Okay. So it comes in two parts, and that's pretty much what's available now. It's the best option unless you're going to try to redo the plugs. I don't know where they went. Oh, here they are. So these are your little plugs. These are still the best option. The only problem with these is trying to hide them, and you just have to get creative. So like, these come in two different parts. You'll get this piece and you'll get this part right here. That's the adapter. It just screws in to those. You just screw the little arms in there, and that's what connects it. Now this is acting as a resistor, because the same amount of power that goes to like your full-size lamp cannot go to your miniature lamp. So what we have to do is we have to, yeah, unless you want to add fireworks to your miniature, you can't have the same power. So without getting too technical and confusing, basically what this piece is doing is it's taking all of that power and it's just kind of retarding it a little bit. It's restricting it so that only a little tiny bit gets through. And that's the same way we were talking about with the little coin batteries. Now the lights that use little coin batteries like this is actually a light bulb. Right there, that's what they call a surface mount LED. That's the little tiny bulb on the tip.
Yeah.
So this is perfect for wiring in little tiny things that you don't want a big bulb in. But the problem is that these can't be hooked in to this kind of power source. They have to be used with batteries.
Although you can get those from some places where they put tiny like resistors on them.
Right, and that was where I was headed next. You can buy packages of these and packages of these resistors on Amazon. And yeah, because they're in this box, or this package, but this is what they are. These little resistors. Now they only have to go on one wire. But
There are two wires there.
yeah, there's two. There's
Is it like your car battery? If you put the wrong one, is it going to blow up?
No, it's not going to blow
No.
up. Well, I mean, your little bulb might blow up, but blowing up means it just flashes and then it's dead. So with all this stuff, it's so low voltage that just forget about the shocks and the different stuff. I mean, the wires can touch and do stuff, and I play with them all the time. You could feel, I could give you two wires, a dead one and a live one, and you wouldn't be able to tell me which one had power going to it. There's nothing to feel at all. So these little resistors right here, these are in a small package. They do the exact same thing that this does. This resists power to your bulb from your power source. This resists power from your home to whatever bulbs you plug into it. All right? So we'll touch on those a little bit more. I wanted to bring a lot of different stuff so it wasn't like you've never seen it before. I wanted to kind of expose you to some of the things. So on these, your stuff plugs right into them. Any of the lights you get at any of the shows, at any of the Hobby Lobby, it plugs directly into this just like a regular outlet. You've got your on-off switch here, and then you've got a fuse. If you cross wires or do something that it doesn't like you to do, you're going to overload this fuse. It's going to stop it from just continuing to burn just like the fuse in your home. You know, if you plug in too many things in the outlet, it trips the breaker. It's the same thing. So I've got one here so you can see the difference. This is one that I blew intentionally so you can see what a blown one looks like. There's a little tiny wire inside there. As long as it's connected, you're good. If it's broken like this one in here, then it needs to be replaced. Also on these, a nice feature is this little light bulb here that for a long time I thought, you know, I've bought so many of these stupid things, and this light bulb never works on any of them to tell me when the power's on. Not one time have I ever seen that light bulb work on any of them, like brand new ones. Well, the reason is because I never tripped a fuse until I accidentally did it. So what happens is if your fuse blows, it diverts power to this little light bulb, and this bulb comes on so that if it's like buried somewhere and you're trying to troubleshoot what's going on, you can look in there and see, oh, that bulb's on, I know I blew a fuse. That's why I'd never seen it, and I'm like, how hard can it be to attach? Your only job is to make electrical components, and you can never connect these bulbs, right? So, I mean, I just learned that when I blew this fuse the other day for you guys. That's what happens. So, and these little things have 3M sticky tape on the back, and you, in theory, are supposed to be able to stick it anywhere, but I don't like this kind of stuff anyways, this sticky stuff. So,
What's the output of that transformer? Is that a 12 volt?
yes, this would be a 12 volt.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I have done, and it's worked well, is every time I go to a resale place, there's usually always a box full of old battery, chargers. And they're very fine print, but I look on the back, if it's 120 volts input and 12 volt output, usually at about 1,000 milliamps, that will power 12 volt bulbs. So I buy them for $2. So
Yeah.
I have a whole box of them at home, of the 12 volt. Unfortunately, I don't do 12 volts anymore. I'm always doing the 3 volt. But yeah, you can get them. Because otherwise, if you go on even Hobby Builder Supply or any of the miniature stores, those little transformers that you plug into the wall, they're not cheap.
Yeah,
they're
this one I got
expensive.
for $10 from Mini Mansions, but I think they're maybe 15 at Hobby Lobby.
I have gotten some in garage sale bags before too, at conventions. I have several.
And you
at home
can,
that I
if you
didn't know
want,
how to use.
if you want to go that route, the next thing that we're going to talk about is going to be perfect for that, because what's going to happen is you're going to get one of these from, a garage sale, or like he said, in a box. But a lot of times they're not going to have these screws because they weren't made for this. They're going to have a cord already attached with, excuse me, with something at the end. You don't care what's at the end, doesn't matter, because you're going to cut it off. And then you're going to create your own little attachment here. But you got to know how to create this attachment, right? So that'll bring us into the next part, which is all this fun little gizmos and gadgets there. So the next part is going to be the splice, or the connection. Now, I did this in really big gauge wire that you would never use in a dollhouse, because I didn't want, if there were people across the room or on the phone, not to be able to see the connection. So I used really big wire. There's several different ways to make these wire connections. Basically, like he was saying about the 12 volt power supply, you just have to cut those 2 wires and expose them, and then you'll have two exposed wires, and you'll have to attach them to something else, which would be that power strip, right? So there's a couple ways to do that without having to use these little prongs that come on this. You can cut these 2 wires off of the prongs, and then you just have to splice them together, which is what I'm showing you how to do here. So you take the 2 wires and twist them together to make this connection, right? These are 2 separate wires, stripped and then twisted together. And then I put a piece of this heat shrink tubing over top of it, just to protect it and kind of make it a little bit safer. And this is the heat shrink tubing. Now, I don't know if you've ever used it, but it's a lot of fun. I like using it. Because I like the fire aspect.
Do you get it at the electrical supply? Is that-
I get all of this stuff on Amazon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because it's easier and
It all comes with everything.
feels
else.
like it's cheaper, but it's
Yeah.
probably not.
And it's not easy to find in a hardware store, very, very small.
What about
Yeah,
like a
sure.
train store, because we have
Yeah,
something like
yeah,
that,
train-
they'd
train.
probably carry that.
People
for
that
you.
do it. Evan,
They would. A lot of that stuff is
designs.
really expensive if you start going into, like he was saying, like the dollhouse shops and the train stores. I
We
mean,
only want 1 or 2.
Right.
And he's getting
Right.
100.
Once you know what size heat shrink, I bought a whole coil of it for very, very small on eBay.
Yeah, that's
Because I go through a lot of it.
online's usually the cheapest way to get this kind of
But you
stuff.
gotta know the size you need, because you can get heat shrink that will cover this huge, huge cables. But
Right.
it'll also go down to like maybe less than a 1/16 of an inch or.
So here's
30
different
seconds of an
examples of
inch.
that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So here's heat shrink tubing that would be for something very, very large.
Yeah.
And then you've got a medium size heat shrink tubing, and then you've got these tiny ones, which is what you would use over here. And you basically just slide your 2 wires. You have to remember to do it before you splice them together, though.
And before you solder them, thank
Yeah,
you.
before you put them together and solder them. And I didn't solder this connection on here because I didn't want to get
Say that
any.
again, what do you have to do before you do?
You have to slide the
Put the
shrink
tube
onto
on.
the wire before you
Oh, I
connect
see.
it and
Okay.
solder
Right,
it.
because otherwise you're not gonna have a way to get this
Gotcha.
on there. So you have to remember, and I'm notorious for forgetting that.
Yeah.
I'll get my wires together and then I'll put a little solder on them and I'll be like, okay, that looks.
Shit.
And then I gotta unsolder them, take them apart, put the new thing on. Or sometimes if I'm in a really big hurry or I'm just not feeling like I wanna redo it, I'll just cut this,
Yeah.
put it on, heat shrink it, and then put a little electrical taper on it and call it a day. That's the lazy route. And these connections, I'm not gonna say you should solder them, but you can solder them, makes them a lot easier, a lot more secure, but that's not really, soldering isn't really something we wanted to cover in a 30-minute little class. Because it takes a long time to really learn how to do that right and get it to seep into the wires and all of that stuff. So these are just basic connections that will get you started. This is a butt connector. It takes 2 wires, so you don't have to twist them together. You just put them in there and you can clamp the edges and it'll stay secure, just the 2 wires. They're bigger and bulkier than this, so I don't usually like to use those. But what I do like to use for these little tiny wires are these. And I don't think I put one up there because they're invisible. But it's this exact same thing right here, even though it doesn't look like it, okay? This is a combination of solder and heat shrink tubing. So you put your wires through here, and we're just gonna use these as an example, okay? You put 1 wire in here in one side, 1 wire in the other side, and then you would take your heat source, which would be like a torch, or I use it like a little torch. Just hold it away and you heat this up. As you heat it up, there's 3 components. There's solder in the middle, and then there's these 2 white things on the end that create a waterproof seal for your wire. So you heat it up. As you heat it up, the solder in the middle melts, and it melts together the 2 wires. So essentially you get this connection that we just spoke about with your solder and your heat shrink tubing
That's
All
awesome.
in one,
in
wow.
one piece.
I need that.
Where do you
Yeah.
get those little gizmos?
These are on Amazon as well.
Game
What are they
changer.
called?
I've never seen those
Well, this is just an example.
Yeah.
This is just an example of where the wires go. This would be a loop, it would do nothing. You would have 2 separate wires.
Oh, okay. I
Right,
thought
so you
were
would
using-
connect, for example, you would connect this if you were trying to power it. You would use one of these wires to one of these with that connection, and then you would cut this wire down and use the other one to here.
Okay.
I was just showing how
they went
the
in.
wires go in and what happens when they do.
Okay.
You need to show, do y'all need to see that over there? How he poked them in there and everything, yeah.
One wire just goes in one side, and then we're
I'm just
gonna
gonna
connect.
get Preston your water.
Pretend like this.
I wish I knew about those
We're not
before I did
doing negative
all of my
and positive.
houses.
There's only 2 wires you're trying to connect. Because you're negative and positive. It's like she said, this is just a loop, it wouldn't do anything.
That's
Right.
waterproof solder.
Why are we doing that if it doesn't do anything?
Because we're trying to connect this wire that would be
Solder and-
connected to our power source to the light.
I know, I should be writing all this.
So this would be plugged into our power source.
That's why I'm
for example.
videotaping.
Okay,
She's gonna send
and
it
you
to
would
you.
need a way, because this bulb
put it on
doesn't
YouTube
come
so
with
we
one of
can
these fancy
see
little
it whenever.
plugs,
Right.
you have to connect it to the power source.
Okay.
So if you decide, I put this example here too for outlets. You can do these around your house as well and just plug things in that way. If you don't want these to show, like I don't like these to show in mine. I don't want you to see any wiring at all. So I don't like to use these. I like to use
Those.
these instead.
Because you can hide them better.
Right, because this is doing the same thing that this is doing.
That's what I've got.
Right, this connects your 2 wires together.
Right.
This does the same thing, except you don't need this part and you don't need this part. You're just directly connecting the wires.
That's connecting those two to the wire down
And
there.
that connects to that.
Correct.
To connect to the power source.
So this would connect to whatever it is you're trying to power. The other part of this is going to have one of these plugs on it and plug right into your power source. So what these do is allows you to attach things that don't have any way to plug in. You can attach several of them. You can put 3 or 4 wires in here for 3 or 4 different lights, and instead of having 3 or 4 different
Have they always had those, or is that something relatively new?
I don't think
Because I've
they've
never-
always had them.
No, I've never seen those before.
Yeah, these,
I haven't either, so.
no, these, I don't know how new they are.
Well, we've had some that were just clear tubes and you
Well, those
put them
wires
in
are
chamber
pretty
and
thin.
opened
Yeah,
it
that's true.
and closed it. But this was 10